Recording. You, you just saw them discuss innate ideas, and this is a principal assumption of the rationalist approach to knowledge, that we come into this world knowing some things already. Now, we saw that Socrates and Plato, coming from a basically pagan polytheistic framework, believed in reincarnation, and I'm not downing reincarnation, so when did the slave boy acquire this knowledge? Well, Socrates says either he was born with it or he acquired it in this life, and he's a slave boy and he's never been taught geometry, so he hasn't acquired it in this life. So Socrates concludes that he must have acquired it in a previous life when his soul was acquainted with the forms, with the perfect entities of which that are outside the cave in Plato's allegory. And that's what real knowledge has to do with. For Plato, knowledge of things in this world can be at best only true opinion. It does not have the certainty and the long-lasting eternal nature of real knowledge for him. So you can say, well, what happened to that knowledge that our soul knew? Well, Socrates' story in the Dialogue de Phaedo is that it's so shocking for a soul to become reincarnated in another body that this knowledge is knocked into a kind of latent state. It's there, but what you need to do is bring it to the surface, and that's the purpose of Socrates asking questions of Meno's slave boy. It's to bring that innate knowledge to the surface so that the boy knows these things once more. So it's by our reasoning abilities that we supposedly get in touch with real knowledge, hence the term rationalism. Now, Descartes is also in that rationalist tradition, but he's a Christian rationalist. Now, while there may be some side sects of Christianity that countenance reincarnation, pretty much most of Orthodox Christianity rejects belief in reincarnation. They go by the biblical verse that says it's appointed unto man, that is human beings, man in the generic sense. It is appointed unto man once to die, and after that the judgment. Now, there's not a lot of room in that verse for recycling our soul through a bunch of past lives, right? So for Descartes, see, if Socrates, and Socrates was asked, well, why didn't we acquire this knowledge at birth? Well, Socrates said, well, that's the very point at which we forget it. But for the Christian rationalists, that's when God puts knowledge into real souls. Now we're going to see the alternative position, and Locke is an empiricist. It's called empiricism. It says if we have knowledge at all, it comes after we're born by use of the five senses, not through pure reason. John Locke says, if you look at that blackboard over there, when we come into this world, John Locke says our mind is a blank slate. We don't have any prior knowledge, no innate ideas. But for Descartes, we do. Now, Descartes is independently wealthy. He can lay in bed till noon and think about mathematics and philosophy, which he did. This unfortunately proved his undoing when, for reasons that are yet unclear to me, he took a job. He's used to growing up to living in France and Holland, but he took a job near the end of his life as personal philosophy tutor to Queen Christina of Sweden. Now, Queen Christina was not a figurehead monarch like, say, Queen Elizabeth in England, where she just does state functions, but unlike the British kings and queens of old, she doesn't really run the state on a day-to-day basis. But Queen Christina was a real monarch. She really ran the state. And so in her busy schedule, the time she had left over for philosophy, to discuss philosophy with Descartes, was between 5 and 6 in the morning at the beginning of her day. Well, here's old Descartes. He's used to sleep until noon, right? Plus, he's not used to the cold climate. And it kind of did him in because he caught a cold that I think turned to pneumonia, and he eventually ended up dying from that. But to go back to Descartes, the father of modern philosophy, what's surprising about him is he did not like philosophy that much. He did not like it as much as mathematics. And what didn't he like about philosophy? Well, one of the things he didn't like was that in mathematics, no one in Descartes' day was going back and questioning the basic principles of Euclid's geometry that had been there since the time of Plato. Whereas in philosophy, in Descartes' day, things were still in a very unsettled state. So Descartes says, look, what I need to do is do for philosophy and for scientific knowledge what Euclid did for geometry. That is, put it on a firm foundation, clear away the underbrush, get all the dead wood out of the way in terms of our beliefs. In other words, in Descartes' meditations, he gets alone and he tries to think through and challenge his current beliefs, just like Plato wants us to do in the allegory of the cave. And why does he do this? Well, he's not trying to be skeptical, but he's trying to put philosophy on a firm footing. But in order to do that, he uses skeptical arguments to try to eliminate beliefs that aren't completely certain. They're not going to be the absolutely certain truths that will function like axioms do in Euclidean geometry. Now, the whole title of Descartes' Meditations is Meditations on First Philosophy. First philosophy is that part of the branch of philosophy known as metaphysics that has to do with the fundamental principles of things. Descartes started the period of modern philosophy, and the 20th century philosopher Richard Rorty said, this is a period where epistemology, the theory of knowledge, was so central to philosophy that you can almost call this a period of philosophy as epistemology. And we'll see this in Descartes. He's worried about how we justify the knowledge that we claim to have in the sciences, in mathematics, and in philosophy. So why do we need this kind of an examination? Well, Descartes says, look, I'm not any different from other people. I probably accepted a lot of false beliefs from childhood. He thinks a lot of false beliefs have crept into philosophy from the scholastic philosophy of the Middle Ages. And if my most fundamental central beliefs are false, he says, beliefs that are logically derived from them are also unreliable and false. So he says, I need to establish a lasting basis for philosophy and science. And this requires that I demolish my current system of beliefs. So he's doing what Plato wanted us to do in the cave. examine our belief structure. And Descartes says we need to start again from new foundations for knowledge. That is, from firm foundations. And so how does he do this? Well, first of all, he says, I don't have to prove all of the beliefs I want to reject false. He says that would be an undoable program. He says it'll be sufficient for me to withhold assent from those beliefs I find questionable. To withhold assent is to refrain from saying, yeah, I think that's true. If you assent to something, you say, well, of course that's true. I accept that as true. If you withhold assent, you're saying, hey, I'm not going to say that's true. He says it'll be sufficient for me to withhold assent from anything that's not completely certain and not beyond doubt. So he's looking for basic principles that are like the axioms of Euclidean geometry, absolutely certain and beyond doubt. And he says any of these other beliefs I'm going to treat as if they were false and set them on the side for right now. Now, also, how many beliefs do you have? Could you even number them? If it's not an infinite number, it's pretty doggone close, right? Now, if he had to sort through every individual belief, this also would be a totally undoable program, right? But what Descartes says when he talks about we don't need to go through each belief individually, all we need to do is look at the most basic principles on which they rest. He's basically talking about principles that allow us to categorize our beliefs into different classes or categories or groups, right? So he's going to be able to raise doubts about a whole group of beliefs. So he said, should these fundamental principles that define a whole group of beliefs be questionable, then every belief in that group is questionable. Now, it should not surprise you, since Plato, in the rationalist tradition, downplays the reliability of what we learn from our five senses. At best, it can be only true opinion. Plato does not call it knowledge. It should not surprise you that Descartes starts out by questioning the beliefs we have from our five senses. So he says one principle we might look into is that many beliefs based on sense experience are so certain that they're beyond doubt. Now, he knows that there are some beliefs that we get from our senses that are questionable, that our senses can deceive us about very small objects or very distant objects. I mean, suppose you're walking on a beach in the morning and it's a little foggy and the sun is just coming up, so there's not good light. You see something in the distance and you say, oh, there's a seagull ahead of me. And you're walking closer to it and you wonder, well, why doesn't it fly away? But then you get closer still and you realize that what you thought was a seagull when you looked at it from a distance is in fact, now that you're closer, just a piece of oddly shaped driftwood that looked like a seagull from a distance. Your senses were deceiving you about a distant object. But Descartes says, while our senses can deceive us, there are other things that other knowledge we get from our senses that seems absolutely certain and beyond doubt. And among that knowledge are beliefs we have about what's going on around us. I mean, think about it. None of us in this room doubts that there's a real chair here, that I'm touching a chair, that you're sitting on real desks, or that you're really on the 3rd floor of a building, or that it's too doggone hot in here. I think they made the changeover in the system to hot water. Would have been nice if they did it on something other than an 80-degree day. So, but what can I say? I'm as much a pawn in the game, you know, as you all are, as far as what buildings and maintenance does. Okay, so Descartes gets alone. He wants to rethink the foundations of philosophy in his meditations, and so he gets alone by himself. It's winter. He's got a big old fire going in a stove, probably not a fireplace. But he says, look, how could I doubt when I look around this room that I, Descartes, am really sitting here by the fire, that I'm really comfortably dressed in my night clothes, right? The translation I took this from says dressing gown, but Descartes' not dressing in drag. They mean more like a nightshirt, right? Descartes says, how could I doubt that I'm sitting here holding a piece of paper on which I'm writing my meditations, and that I have hands and a body and a pen that my hand is holding? So how can he doubt such absolutely or seemingly certain knowledge? Well, here's what Descartes does. This is what some philosophers call his dream conjecture. He says, well, but wait a second. Haven't I had extremely vivid dreams where I thought I was sitting in my living room fully clothed, and I woke up from the dream and I was in bed and undressed? So Descartes remarks that he's had the same experiences of sitting by the fire in vivid dreams, and on waking he discovered that these beliefs were false. He was really lying unclothed in bed in the next room. So here is the question that Descartes asks, and it's the question that you might want to ask yourself. He says, well, wait a second. If I can be deceived sometimes by thinking that I'm in the real world and I find that it's really a dream, well, why couldn't I be deceived always? Why couldn't this be a dream, right? This room that I think is so real, why couldn't I be dreaming now? How can I show that I'm not dreaming now? Well, I'm going to leave that as a rhetorical question for next time, and we'll pick up with our story next time. So this is in Blackboard, but think about it. It's not as easy as you think to show that you aren't dreaming now. Okay. Again, if you want to know if you